various materials. This is our latest study, and I will explain to you to begin with a little bit about our laboratory, because many of you are new, and then we will get into the specifics of the study we have found. It will be a little long, and I'd like, and I know that sometimes it's a little, it may be a little more technical than you need, but the reason is, and Chandrabhushan and I discussed this at some length, this is going to be part of a long-term work that CSE is going to be doing. And in some senses, it's good for us to explain to you and bring you up to speed with the information we have, so that as we keep repeating this and coming back to this issue, we're all conversant with the language, we all understand the complexities of it, because it's a little more complex than a normal study, which would just say, okay, this is the contaminant and this is what we found. Why is it dangerous? What does it do to us? What do we want government to do? These are all issues of interest, and we will take a little time to explain it. So let me start. Civic, Sao, can I start the presentation? Yeah. So where is the presentation from?
This one.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, we're trying to be high-tech. Please forgive all the glitches. We've never done this before. We are trying hard to see if we can use technology to put the message out. We also have Dr. Devi Shetty from Bangalore, who was not able to come to Delhi today, but he's joining us live from Bangalore. And I have to confess that one of the reasons we started this study is because doctors like him came to us saying to us that they are very worried at what they are seeing in India. So today's study is about antibiotics in chicken. That is the study that we have been working on now for the past year and a half. It began, as I said, with doctors coming to us expressing concern that they are beginning to see something quite dangerous in their hospitals. They are seeing that more and more patients that they are trying to treat with antibiotics, the antibiotics are not working, that people are resistant to the antibiotics. But also what they're finding, and this was what was of great concern, is that some of the patients are not patients who would be normally coming from the upper middle class, where antibiotics are given because they're expensive. They are normally given by doctors and overprescribed by doctors. So the question in everybody's mind was that, is there something more? Can there be antibiotics in the food we are eating? And this is why Chandrabhushan, who heads the laboratory at CSE, decided to work with Amit Khurana, who is the head of our food toxin unit, and Ramakant, who's the head of the lab, to put together a study to look at antibiotics. And we chose chicken to begin with. We've already tested honey, as some of you may know, and I'll get to it. Now, the lab. CSE set up a lab in 2000. We set up the lab for the very clear interest to investigate issues of public health concern and to respond to community requests. This lab was actually set up by CSE's founder, director, Anil Agarwal. And it was Anil's dream, and I have to say that at that stage we had not even understood the potential of setting up a lab like this. It was his dream that we should have an independent, highly credible, scientific testing facility so that we can test environmental toxins which are beginning to happen in our country, but we can do that with independence and with credibility. And so we said this is really about science for ecological security. The first study we did, and many of you may be aware of this, was a study we did in 2001 in Padre village in Kerala on endosulfan. And I have to tell you that this study that was done in 2001, we still get defamation notices from the pesticide industry till date. And the pesticide industry has recently filed, what was it, a non-bailable warrant was issued against me, Arnab sitting here, Ankur over here, and a few others, from a court in Vapi, and all because of our study that we did in Kerala. Even though this study in Kerala has been proved and proved and proved and proved, every time it has been contested, studies have shown very clearly that it is endosulfan which has created the problem. And today, if any one of you would have noted that the president went to Kerala 10 days ago, and the president in his speech said that endosulfan poisoning is something that we all need to be worried about. So let's be very clear that this is the purpose of the CSE lab. When we did the study, we faced huge opposition. All of you know the study we did in 2003 on bottled water. We tested pesticides in bottled water. The good thing was that we got norms set for pesticides in bottled water by the Union Health Ministry. We then tested colas for pesticides. We first tested in 2003. A joint parliamentary committee was set up. The JPC vindicated CSE study. It said very clearly that we were right. It called us whistleblowers, said that our methodology cannot be faulted, that the CSE lab did its work completely right in terms of scientific testing. And finally, after the second time we tested in 2006, 5 years later, we got mandatory standards for pesticides in soft drinks. They're the world's first standards, but they're still high, and we are still fighting at BIS to try and get even lower standards for pesticides in soft drinks. And our argument has been, so that all of you understand, our argument has been that soft drinks have nothing nutritional in them. So pesticides can be given in food to a certain extent because the trade-off is between poison and nutrition. But in the case of soft drink, there is nothing nutritious. So why should we waste our pesticide quota on a drink which is simply water, sugar, and is in any case bad for us? So it's something we are still fighting. Then in 2005, we tested the blood of Punjab farmers, cotton farmers, for pesticides. We found a very deadly concoction of pesticides in the blood of Punjab farmers. And it is at that time that my colleague Vibha, who's somewhere here, Vibha actually traveled and found the train, which is today called the Cancer Express. And it was in 2005 that we did the study and we looked at the Cancer Express. But again, it's taken almost 6-7 years for the study not to be contested. And now in the last elections in Punjab, both in the assembly elections last time, as well as the central election, the parliamentary elections, pesticides and cancer in Punjab finally made it to become a political issue. Drugs is a political issue, so is pesticide poisoning and cancer a political issue. We tested trans fat in edible oil in 2009. We have got standards issued in 2013 for trans fat. We are not happy with the standards. We understand that now new standards have been issued, but they are lying on the table of the minister. So it would be good to push and get we are basically asking for the timeline for the standards to be preponed. The government wants 5 more years for the trans fat level in Vanaspati to be reduced. We are saying you've already wasted 10 years. Please now reduce the time that is given to oil industry to reduce it. So we are told that the new standard amending the timeline are ready. We tested in 2009 a study which was a very interesting study on Bhopal, where we checked why the contamination in the outside area of the factory. And we basically linked it to what Union Carbide was producing, and we found that contamination. And since then, we've actually done a lot of work looking at what needs to be done to clean up that factory site. Very little is happening still. We did antibiotics in honey in 2010. Many of you will remember. This is, in fact, our second study on antibiotics that we are releasing today. We tested 12 brands of honey, and we found antibiotics in them. We then got a ban on antibiotics in honey, the standards issued by FSSAI. So obviously, one of these days we will retest the honey, and we hope that that is actually meeting the standard now. So, but clearly we won't tell you when we are doing it, but we will. In 2012, we did another study. We looked at junk food. We looked at all the brands, whether it is cola, whether it is hamburger, whether it is chips. We looked at it, and we essentially came up with a clear study which said that there were very high levels of salt, sugar, fat in this, and we demanded a ban on junk food in schools, and we asked for labeling on junk food, saying that it must say what is the percentage of salt that packet of chips has in proportion to what is my daily intake, allowed daily intake. And that study, one of these days, we will tell you. In fact, the next case there is on the 6th of August, and we are hoping that the High Court will take some action on it as well. So today's study, antibiotics in chicken, from farm to fork, and that is really what we want to explain to you. What is this study all about, and why are we so worried about it? Firstly, it's important to understand that antibiotic resistance is not anymore that we need to talk about in terms of what will happen. It's not about the future. कि ये होने वाला है, कि कभी हमें इसके बारे में फिक्र करने की जरूरत है. The fact is that all over the world, there is now deep concern that antibiotic resistance is growing, that the number of antibiotics that we use today are becoming ineffective because there is bacteria that has become resistant to that antibiotic. In fact, today saying that we may need to live in what they are calling a post-antibiotic era. Now that is worrying. As you know, that it was the advent of the penicillin which changed the way human survival and mortality is today. And today, if the world is saying that we may be at a stage where we are looking at a post-antibiotic era, it is something to be deeply worried, because you are now saying that even common infections and minor injuries could end up killing us because the antibiotics we use become ineffective. And that's particularly worrying because there has been no new class of antibiotics that has been discovered since 1980. So it's even more important to preserve, therefore, the effectiveness of the existing antibiotics. You're not discovering new, and the old medicines are now becoming useless, which means that we all are in grave danger. How is it affecting us? One, as I said, common infections are becoming difficult or sometimes even impossible to treat, which leads to prolonged recovery, increased length of hospital stay, more deaths, higher cost of treatment, greater spread of infection and resistance. Antibiotics are becoming ineffective. The drugs of choice are being replaced by a second line of drugs, which are then more expensive and have greater side effects. And so as a result of it, the gains that we have made in modern medicine are today at risk. We are at risk of losing that. The data in terms of how bad is antibiotic resistance we get from the rest of the world. In the US, they talk about 2 million minor illnesses, 23,000 deaths per year, because, and they can attribute this directly to the growing problem of antibiotic resistance. They also calculate that something like $20 billion is spent as direct annual healthcare cost because of antibiotic resistance. In the EU, they say it's euro 1.5 billion in terms of healthcare costs and productivity loss. Now in India, unfortunately, there is absolutely no data, very little sketchy data exists. There's no national level data. But what we know is that 1/3 of the 2 lakh children that die in the first 4 weeks die because they are resistant to antibiotics. That is a data that has.
It's a Lancet study.
It's a Lancet study. 15% of those treated for TB are table. We reviewed 13 studies that have been done in India and different hospitals in India on antibiotic resistance. We looked at the common infection. What is it? Which antibiotic is it most commonly resistant to? If you take the case of Enterobacter, for instance, which is infection of the bloodstream, some 30 to 100% resistance was. It's a 30. This is very important when you look at it. The studies that are being shown in 3 most common antibiotics that are used. Now, why the resistance? Clearly, because there is over misuse antibiotics in humans and animals. And I'm stressing absolutely no understanding that misuse of antibiotics in India also because of its use in animal farming. Yet antibiotics only on what doctors prescribe and the that we have as human beings. Yet in the US, to remember this, I was stunned when I saw this statistic. 80% of the antibiotics that are used in the US are actually used in animals and not in humans. 80%. Focus on antibiotics. I think somebody's phone.
No, just move.
As I said,
Yeah. Okay.
CB will go and explain the study.
Uh, there is a generation now across the world that